Professor Howard Williams takes you on a journey through time and space, exploring death and memory, past and present. Archaeodeath.
Rachael Keri Williams here is, I can describe her own expertise, but is a wonderful creator. We've done a YouTube video together that will be out soon, and we were talking about her work exploring black cemeteries, in Lincoln Cemetery, and the whole challenges of preserving black history through funerary spaces and educating with those spaces. And then we want to move on now in the second conversation to talk more about, I don't know, the politics and the power of cemeteries to be places of resistance, places of protest, places of living with the ancestors, living with those communities can be a way of connecting to one story. They are resources of history, but also they're physical places in the landscape that exhibit and persist that history in the face of all manner of attempts to erase. That's my sort of hope where we're roughly going, but I'm sure there's other points and more nuanced and more, take beyond that. So, but we want other people to join us who have points they want to make about US black cemeteries from other parts of the world, people's experiences of working with the dead, either as a mourner, either as a genealogist, whether as an archaeologist, whether as someone who cares for a cemetery, has a role in that. Is that the kind of thing we want to do?
Someone who prepares the dead as well. I think, because, one of the kind of questions in like looking at your work, that part of what you seem to do, and explain this to me, but like is, some archaeologists will say they study old things, dead bodies, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But you're also studying the memory of how people become memorialized right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always political, it's always selective, and it's always complex, and there's always tensions. It's not just in hot spots of the world where there are deep divides where the cemeteries take on these roles. Almost every cemetery, every funerary space has some kind of micropolitics or some kind of about who gets to be remembered, where the investment goes, who cares, who doesn't care, what we choose to remember or not. I think, yeah,
and it is like necropolitics, in a very big way. I mean, right now in the United States, some people at least are waking up to really how contrived and controlled our thinking, our education, so on and so forth, has been for all time. But that people don't think of cemeteries as being, a place that's of contended memory.
Yeah.
And they certainly are. And you found that in, your work. It's like you're coming up against supremacy mythologies and so on and so forth because you work with the dead.
Yeah. And it's through these spaces. You see, the power and danger of cemeteries is they're spaces that you can connect to ancestors. They can be personal but collective, but that can be co-opted, misused. So we see how the choices of who to honor. We've seen that, we see that in public statuary, but we also see it in cemetery spaces of who gets the privileges of the past, often echo down the generations of who gets the gravestones, who gets the memorialization, and who doesn't. Even if it's casual neglect, opposed to there's times and places in history where we've seen active destruction, vandalism. They call it vandalism, mindless vandalism. Often it's strategic, deliberate attacks. But we also have, it doesn't need to be that. It can be just the casual decision not to renovate or restore or preserve some gravestones over others based on criteria that are never properly set, or if they are set, they're set to the disadvantage of many people for the few. So you have this kind of, and you have examples where the memory production in cemeteries is often about the monuments, but it's also about the performance of the funeral, how cemeteries become places of power differential, but also places of power performance where you can actually sometimes subvert the structures and hierarchies, and cemeteries can be places therefore of resistance to the overarching structures. So places where, you know, and we've seen this in the black experience in the states and elsewhere in the Americas, where from enslavement onwards, cemeteries are one of the spaces outside of overseers' control, where even in a subtle way, you know, articulation of identity and relationships of community can be forged and reproduced without the power of the authorities to curtail it or to, you know, quash it. So they can, but also, and we see that in other parts of the world where we see, you know, on sectarian lines or cultural lines or whatever it may be, cemeteries can be places where marginalized groups can bring themselves together, identify a community. But then also, it has to be said, just to qualify that, we have some marginalized communities who eschew cemeteries, who realize that cemeteries are so managed by the centralized church or authorities that they say, well, our identities are disconnected from the cemetery.
Yes.
And so we have a lot of British, traditionally, I know it's a slur in the States, but they do self-identify as gypsy communities or traveler communities or Romany communities. You know, I just qualified that because American viewers sometimes correct me and say, but actually it is a term that is still used. But these communities, the Romany communities in the UK, have traditionally invested in cemeteries in terms of flowers and elaborate gravestones, even though they know they are burying their dead with communities that don't share their identities. So the cemetery is a space of, they deny it at one level, the dead are not there, but they are there, and they invest in it to say, we are here because we're mobile. We don't have property in the same way, but we do have the dead. So that, you know, it's not, there's no single formula.
Howard, that's so interesting because it is very similar here. And, right, that because Black people, especially in the 19th century, but you can argue even, you know, today in different ways, it's like you came together, purchased graveyards because they couldn't be buried in, you know, white cemeteries.
Yes.
And so they set up burial leagues and purchased cemeteries and did this old commemoration. And, you know, in so many parts of the country, then often, like in our case too, kept having to move the dead over and over and over again, right? Because you couldn't hold on to that land. Eminent domain, you know, is a big way that you lose the cemetery. But people have leave things that are on graves on the surface of the ground. You know, you have your grave goods, objects that people cared a lot about during life, the seashells, all sorts of things like that, bringing flowers. And it becomes this point of, you know, you're saying like, yes, we do exist. We are here. We are visible. You can keep pushing us. You can keep moving us, but we're still maintaining that. Yeah.
And it's I mean, at one level it is discursive, but it's not discursive in terms of that people aren't maybe actually saying these things. Their songs, their epitaphs, maybe calling attention to that resistance. But they don't need to be, because the material is can be the non-discursive. It's saying it, but without words. And that is the power of ritual material culture in the cemetery context, is a gravestone, even if it's a humble one, or the flower arrangements can have really subtle messages that they may be ephemeral, but for the communities coming together, the choice of coffin, the choice of, you know, any aspect of the funeral can be the resistance, can be the story. And we can't always, as archaeologists, we can't always pick up all of that, but we can recognize in the choice of a separate burial space or denial of other burial spaces. And this applies in the UK to non-conformists who sought places of worship and their places of burial separate from the established church. It applies to Quakers and then Methodists and all of that. And that overlaps with the colonial experience and enslaved people and this kind of, it's necrogeography and necropolitics.
Yes.
You can't necessarily read it off in a direct way, and you've got to know the historical context, because it's easy to get it wrong if you're not aware of that community, aware of that story. but we can read text and we can read material culture. We can interpret the material culture, not simply people honouring their dead, but making sense of their lives, often lives of great suffering and lives of disenfranchisement in traditional spaces. And so that's why I think cemeteries are both powerful and potentially subversive spaces in many contexts, because the authorities can't lock them down practically or symbolically. Well, you can't stop people doing what they want to do with the dead, if that makes sense.
But you can.
Well, yeah.
They can.
There are ways
they do often, right?
There are ways to circumvent it, I suppose, is what I meant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it is simultaneously, it's like people are upset when, for example, a cemetery is vandalized, quote unquote, right? But they also, it's also easy to pave a cemetery over.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a weird double thing. And when we have so many people that are not like, the problem that we are constantly pushing up against is the lack of knowledge that the cemetery is here anymore. Right.
Yes.
And that and people have distanced themselves from their ancestors, from the dead, from the cemetery, from the commemoration that used to occur here regularly. Right. Because it became locked in a sundown town and it was dangerous to come.
Yeah.
Across 2 sundown towns in a Netherland. No man's. But they would
we've got hi Alex. Hi Zach.
So I invited 2 people up who wanted to join, and thank you for joining, Alex. And we want to, if people want to join up, ask, add in comments, add any perspectives, that's fine. If they want to just chill out, that's fine. But I'll try and sort of say, drop down if you don't have any questions after a while, and we can have more people up. Yeah. I'm trying to work out, not for you, Alex. I'm just talking about generally. But equally, I'm still trying to work out how to add extra boxes on here, and I feel a bit embarrassed. I can't work it out how to, because you can change the settings.
I think if we just invite.
Just invite people. Okay.
It'll add. It'll continue to grow.
Wait, that one.
Well, it also helps to hit the little double people button. That's how you change the grid.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'm looking.
So there should be 2 little people down at the bottom that represent guests.
Yeah.
So you push that.
Yeah.
And then it should give you options for the grid, whether they're along the side.
Yeah, it's not. It's giving me just long lists of potential to potentially invite.
Yeah. Just invite. You can just invite people then. That means you have a flexible grid. I like flexible grids.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever. As long as people feel they can join in, that's the main thing.
Then it leaves your face nice and in frame. It doesn't minimize everybody to these little.
That's good. So, Alex, welcome. Did you want to sort of say we cut across you a bit? I'm sorry, man.
I cut across you. I jumped in.
Sorry. I felt I'd finished what I was saying anyway.
Where I kind of leapt in because I was sharing the live with people and went off the link. But when I came back in, we're talking about how that cemeteries and burial places are it's just they're constantly it's political places, but usually in the small politics sense, in terms of the just what it will say about what society is, or maybe even doesn't speak about, but we're being thrust onto the it'll be on the it's on the. It's going to maybe be on the big political stage too. I don't want to be in fucking politics. No, I'm just
Yeah, I know you
rambling. But but being in the impact of being in sundown towns for a place where you think about, in this case, in decades of people not being able to go back safely to visit their ancestors, and lose connection with place, the people, nobody wants to talk about the fact that that the problems that we see over and over and over again are because of systemic oppression over and over again of all different communities, right? Like, so you're in England, we got different histories, but I'm gonna step down.
Sure. No, but I'm actually in Wales, but same point.
Wales.
No problem. I work across the border in England, and I grew up in England. I've got a mixture of Welsh, Scottish, and English ancestry, but I live in Wales, and these are ex-coal mining communities I'm living around. That doesn't dox me because that doesn't narrow it down at all. But other industries too, steel, brick making. This is a heavily industrialized area of railway lines, and the communities are still recovering from that post-industrial crash, and they were hit hard in the 1970s and 80s, particularly the Conservative government of the 1979, 1989 to 1989 and Thatcher years. Really ran down these communities as coal mines finally shut following a long process, and the cemeteries are eerie. They're records of that history, but they speak of quiet resistance. And I always talk about the fact that the biggest 20th century mining disaster in Welsh history, there were bigger casualty figures in the 19th century, but the biggest mining disaster in 20th century Welsh coal mining history was the Gresford colliery disaster. And the villages around Gresford and the village of Gresford itself, the churchyards still have memorials to the individuals that perished in the explosion in the mine, and they don't say they died or passed away. They say they were killed in the mine. They were killed with a cap. The K is important. The
mine.
The mine the conditions. Because that disaster went to Parliament and the prosecution against the owners for corporate manslaughter or whatever it was called. It wasn't called that, but the equivalent, and they got off with like a petty fine, and it was one of the great travesties of the interwar years is that the Gresford colliery, the safety issues were so heinous that they should have been prosecuted, but they weren't. They let off the hook, and that the grave then becomes a site of no one's like protesting at the grave. No one, but for generations to come, the graves, the choice of words is making a point. It's making a point. This father, this brother, this son, it didn't just pass away, fell asleep in Jesus. They were buried alive, and the bodies were never recovered. And it's grim. They decided, and then there was another tense decision with the disaster because the mine kept burning. They made the decision to shut it off, to entomb the dead, to try and shut down the fire that was raging for weeks, days certainly. And that was a terrible decision and communities are still living with the ghosts of the dead. The haunting presence underground, a mile underground, there are their loved ones that will never be retrieved.
Yeah.
We talk about lost at sea as the anxieties of those that go to war or fishermen and people lost at sea and not being able to locate them. The horror here is that people know exactly where they are. They know exactly where they are to within feet, but they can't get at them. And that is a kind of horror, a real horror story, not some kind of spiritual apparition. We're talking about real haunting here, that you can't, you can never erase for this community that there are those bodies. Sorry,
that is, I was looking at these two particular, works, one by my professor who's now passed away, English, who's a post-structuralist. He was born in 1928 in France, and he's the sole survivor of his family who died at Auschwitz. And I mean, in class, he would talk about this and talk about what it did. His mother pushed him in a closet when he was a boy and told him to stay silent. And, you know, then he spent his life writing about and between the silence, and it didn't, you know, he would say like, it's like, it's this dark space. And Raymond Fetterman would write about the silence, the darkness, what came before, and family, and what he lost and what happened. But that was not him. Raymond Fetterman was not him. But he didn't have another name anymore either. It's like and then a comic book artist at the same time, which I'm like, why is his name Alegbe? And he's talking about France in the 20th century and the Algerian massacre of 1961, and the bodies that, you know, went into the Seine. Why am I saying it? Seine, the river.
The Seine, yeah, you got it right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and like where, and how there's this, you know, this silence around that, not being able to talk about that either. And they both, you know, pinpoint police specifically as French police as betraying their people. But they don't have with Raymond. He has a memorial. There's a memorial to his family, right? Raymond Fetterman, because they died at Auschwitz. They were taken in Paris, and there are memorials. There are, you know, to his family. And the memorial, I don't know, the memorials, it seems like Alegbe is saying, don't quite meet the needs of the people who are victims of this other type of colonialism and fascism. Yeah. And I feel that way. I mean, I feel like it's like our memorialization in the United States of violence against Black people, Black bodies, it fails. It has failed. It's failed the nation. So I'll stop going off. That one, did you came up and
yes, that one. I was going to say, thank you, Rachel. That's really insightful. And we're talking about necropolitics, cemeteries, politics, and the dead, past and present. And we're inviting people up who have any questions or comments. That one, over to you. Welcome. Sorry to make you wait.
In the comments, I mentioned the stacked graveyard, Jewish graveyard in Prague that I have visited.
Mm-hmm. Oh, where, sorry, I missed that. Yes.
You can't even see the faces of the gravestones. So like the names are lost in between, sometimes like 9 gravestones stacked. And I was just wondering, because I was thinking about all the different strange funereal activities. Like now there's this thing where you can get yourself turned into a tree pod. Mm-hmm. But I was wondering if there were like through lines of funereal practice that are like common throughout history and like cross-cultural. Like as an archaeologist, do you notice particular?
Yeah. Oh, well, that's really quick, because that's an awesome. I think it's funny. I lived in Prague, and I was already thinking about Prague as well in this, but that I saw one of your YouTube videos, Howard, with I'm getting weird feedback. That might be you, Alex.
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah, Alex, mute. Yeah, there we go. That you did an interview with a woman who's an archaeologist, and she was talking about a burial where they found different body parts from different people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's an interesting one for this burial practice thing, but yeah.
So
the catacombs of France are like that a lot, where like they aren't always the same body stacked together. Like, and also, oh god, when the rocks in the mountain. That's the one I want the most explanation for. I don't know if you know about this.
Yeah.
But like there's this habit of broken mouth. Like there's one part of it where it's just the stretching, the grin happens because of the way we decompose. But there's also this habit of like stuffing rocks and stuff in people's mouths when they're buried.
Yeah, thank you. So there's 3 points. I can quickly go through and answer them, and please feel free to come back and query anything I say. But I'd like to have a go, and Rachel, please, and Alex, do add anything that you think. So gravestones, right? I think it's important to say that we have evidence from many different cultures from across the world of marking the graves of the dead for future, for return, for remembrance. And at one level, that seems like a great commonality and universality. But for every society that does that, there are those that do not mark the dead, do not mark the graves, either because they're denied it or they don't want it. And so at one level, it seems like a great universal, but we've got to remember that equally, like this is not denying, this is actually situating in history the particular US desire to mark the graves of the dead. And partly it's because of land claiming and settler colonialism. Partly it's also because within that settler colonialism, there are marginalized groups that are trying to fight and identify themselves and claim out their own identities that are being denied them. And so you have this real intent. There is a particular intensity, as far as I see it, in American cemetery emphasis on marking the dead. In other parts of the world, I'm saying it's simultaneously, it's universal. Simultaneously, we have to look at the specific context in which at particular times and places that emphasis comes. And let me take another example. The Welsh churchyard or the English churchyard. Yes, the desire has often been to mark and remember the dead with a prominent gravestone. But if you look back before the 18th century, only a very few number of graves would have long-term permanent stone markers. Most of the churchyard or the cemetery, where there were some cemeteries already being established earlier than the 18th century, most of them would have been, very sparsely memorialized. The density of gravestones we see in a modern English or Welsh parish churchyard, let alone a graveyard of nonconformists, is the product of industrialization, democratization, the middle class wanting to emerging and wanting to adopt these elite funerary practices, the working class trying to define their own identities and various subdivisions thereof. And so when we look at something like Prague and the Jewish community, that would have been a very exceptional deep time practice that would have been very unusual within the wider cemetery, the wider cityscape. And that's why it's so significant. That's why it looks so odd, because it's defining as a specific Jewish cultural, political, religious identity within a European cityscape. So so what I'm trying to get across to you, and is yes, marking the dead is a universal, but that can take so many different forms, and we need to understand how it develops and changes within specific historical circumstances. Yes, and as Rachel says, memorialization is not a universal. It really took off during the Civil War. And so, the idea that we should expect, even if you look at the stats, even in a modern dead, a lot of people don't claim the ashes of their loved ones, let alone want to pay for a burial plot. And we're seeing the dead returning to invisibility is actually only a fraction of people in any one region or locality want a fixed marker. So
I mean, in the case, like amongst Black Americans, I'm not sure that is entirely true. When you have to pay $20,000 to bury somebody, it's insane.
That's right. Afford. Yeah.
Right. I mean, and that is a politics in and of itself, right? Like, I mean,
it's always about money.
Traditional ways, yes. And our traditional ways of memorializing and caring for the dead have been professionalized, privatized, even, right? That's controlled by the state. You have to have a license. You, right? You have to go to school for that, and that means you have to pay more money. And if you're an active you can't just bury somebody on your property anymore. In most places, you can't even sprinkle ashes anywhere.
Which is such a wild turn for America, because we used to have a very comfortable relationship in the 19th century with death, to the point where people would lay in state, which is like something we think of for like presidents and like major figures and stuff. But like, people used to have the dead body in their house for extended periods of time. Like,
That's true.
You know, and so these things have changed. I looked at this one thing. It's either like Serbia or one of the like southern. So
you broke up a bit there. That one.
Yep, broke up. You're breaking up.
where you see people's cars as their memorial, like, or like incredibly hyper realistic sculptures or like images. Like now, like this is something I never seen before, where you can get like a color photo, essentially,
a photo on your
as part of your grave.
Yes.
Seeing that a lot more in the UK too, and it's really eerie to see how it's developed. Even in the time I've been looking at cemeteries in the last 20. Yeah, I've been looking at cemeteries all my life, but particularly in the last 20 years, just how common it is now. People want a portrait, almost like a Facebook profile, and some of them are quite good, but others really.
And you could have moving ones too.
Yeah, I haven't seen those. Yeah, my word.
Yeah,
that's a bit eerie. And you can have QR codes, and you can have, so you can link it to a digital space. And I suppose
but what's what's interesting about that is that you can find examples of that going back as well. I remember, Howard, you were at one cemetery, and I can't remember, this was a while ago.
Yeah.
And where it was, but it was like it had this whole record of, in this vivacious, detailed language of this man's deeds.
Oh yeah, he's like a sort of very 17th, early 18th century sort of biography on the dead, going on and on and on. It's like, and he was the king's postmaster general, and he was and then he was MP for this, and then his children did that. It's like a proper biography. But
when someone's done something bad as well, sometimes they have that on the grave. Or like I've seen, especially with people who were with the circus, their headstones can be incredibly elaborate from the 19th century, carved with animals, or a big top, or juggling, and these incredibly detailed monuments that were placed on their graves. A contortionist is like doing contortions.
Yeah, that personalization. And I suppose I've talked about this before, and it is a protest in itself, a rage against the world and circumstance. But when you have photographs of the very young and those that never really open their eyes put on gravestones, I find that very jarring. But that's a personal thing. But people are doing it, and I understand why they're doing it, because of that raw loss. But also it serves as a sort of marker. They were here, or prints of footprints or handprints of they're taken before their interment or cremation, and then that put onto the gravestone. So it's very emotive. I find too much bloody emotion, in my opinion, but that's
I've had that. I've done that with pets.
Yeah,
archaeodeath, where like that is what I have as a marker for my cat, is the footprints.
That's really I mean, my sister did that with her dog as well. Like, and when that came out, and then they bring a thing so that you can do a paw print.
And there's a lot of this you can frame in terms of religion, and you can say, well, this is a Christian context, this is a Muslim context, but there's so much, shall we say, multi-faith or secular, and it's commercialized and it's controlled, and our emotions are manipulated, and we're being bought and sold in death. We're being, money is being made off us, of course. Hi, Lucy. Thank you for joining. Wonderful to see you. But the cemeteries are not dead spaces. They're spaces of active, ongoing negotiation, and some of that is overtly political, but often it's more of a personalized protest against circumstances that may not be. You may not put on your gravestone, and they died because the NHS were shit and they didn't get them to hospital in time, or they died because their son-in-law never brought the groceries around on time. And those stories will stay off the gravestone, but you can almost hear the silent protests in a lot of the choices that what people choose to say or choose to represent, what symbols. So when and what is not said, and I find it very eerie in that sense about cemeteries, is you're getting a bit of a story. You'll never get the whole story, but
I definitely want a joke marker. It's like something that I probably won't do it because I'll have grandkids by then or whatever. But the idea of haha, I got out, or haha, I escaped, or some,
well, there's it's now, born a slave now is free. I've seen that on markers, right?
And that's deadly serious and a deadly for all descendants, anyone who sees that, whether you're a relative or not, that speaks out. Down the generations in a way that few statements can. But I wanted to quickly, before I asked Lucy to her input, is I just wanted to make the mention about the rocks in mouths point that one mentioned. So actually, articulating and disarticulating the dead, the assumption of corporal integrity in dead is incredibly diverse. Seems to be no rule. People can break up the body, cremate, excarnate, allow body parts to be reassembled, and we're starting to identify more of that, not because our techniques are getting better. Rocks in mouth, really interesting. We've got some deep time examples of people stuffing things in mouth, shells, rocks, quartz pebbles, and some of this may be not so much, it depends on the context, but it's been often seen as disrespect to the dead person. Often it may be about protecting that dead person from the mouth as an entry point as well as a point of emission. In other words, protecting the person from demons inhabiting their body. So it's about the mouth is being shut up, not as a punishment to the dead, but to stop that orifice being a conduit of the dead being inhabited by demonic forces. So we see it in medieval and modern era burials. There's a great one from Scotland, from the Isle of May, where they've got this a scallop shell, and they think it could be to do with pilgrimage, and someone who's been a pilgrim to the Shrine of St. James in Santiago de Compostela, and or to literally not only attest to their pilgrimage, but to protect them from their body being taken over in a Christian worldview where the very ether, the landscape, the environment around you is full of potential demonic forces. We don't know. We can't get back and interview the person. Why did you feel about death? What do you think about the scallop shell in your mouth? We can't do that. Archaeology isn't about that. Or it'd be weird if they did. But but we can at least sort of see this is little localized, almost folkloric, or should we say vernacular traditions responding to broader ideas that the church doesn't have a say over approving or not, but people are doing it on a localized level. So I just find those things fascinating. But I'll shut up now. Lucy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on cemeteries and necropolitics.
My goodness. Where do we even start? We have an excellent. I was actually out at site today. I was out at Whithorn Priory, sorry, which is one of the most ancient sites that we have of early Christian articulation. and so I was hoofing around gravestones, most from the 19th century, but you can see over and over this kind of like rearticulation of these burial sites over time, with some of the grave markers are incredibly ancient, like 800 years old, and then you've got the kind of more modern ones, and then to one weird side, someone built a Church of Scotland kirk, sort of like almost in defiance of the medieval priory. So when you look at the landscape, it's like you're reading sort of like layers of this articulation just lying around. And the stories that we see, the wordings that we see, the memorials kind of almost read like interpretations. Covenanter graves in Scotland are very much like that. They contain sort of like 19th century reinterpretations of previous stories. And yeah, necropolitics, what a word for it.
What are Covenanter graves?
All right, so Covenanters they were kind of like the Scottish Taliban. They were Calvinist rebels who were religious zealots, these Protestant religious zealots, and they were romanticized later on and seen as freedom fighters. So when you go to their graves, what you see is this rearticulation of their story into like 19th century romanticized ideals. So the guilty.
I'm like, what? Like people change their headstones later?
No, they'll change or create new memorials next to the old ones.
Yes.
There's one near me where they've taken a piece of the old memorial and inset it into the new memorial, or the new, by new I mean 19th century. Okay, and then they will reinterpret the story of these sort of like religious freedom fighters to fit the politics of the day, show their allegiance to certain ideals, which was usually sort of like the Protestant work ethic, or like freedom from whatever, like dogmas and things like that. So
they're like martyrs almost, aren't they? Even if they didn't actually die.
Well, this is interesting because it's what I mean. I was thinking about like in terms of the Viking stuff, right? And the importance of kind of rewriting the story, and how people are attached to attacking you, Archaeodeath.
I just can't leave it alone. Some of the comments are so entertaining. I just can't not respond, because I've got them all in my filtered comment section, and I just go. I've had hundreds. It's really good. It's not good. It's terrible, but it's fun.
But I mean, I also think about this because it's a trend that is occurring in the United States right now at Black cemeteries, right? Where people, and here it's like nobody wants to so much invest or is that excited about investing in restoring what's already there. They're putting new monuments that say different things in Black cemeteries. And it's disturbing to me. Maybe I could feel better about it if I'm like, oh, it happens other places, but I don't know. In this case, it's like there's already a record of something there in a lot of cases, and yes, you want to change and commemorate and say what wasn't said, but you don't even know what was said before.
Yeah, so you mean not necessarily with goodwill and trying to write but perhaps in so doing, perhaps romanticizing or stylizing or overlooking the local story. Is that what kind of thing you mean?
I think it's like an overlooking of what's actually there. So there's a story that is like, okay, United States colored troops, like Black soldiers in the Civil War. Everybody wants to put up, these things commemorating them, but they're buried with their families. So then their names get remembered and their families are not mentioned.
You've got intersecting political agendas there, haven't you? Because of course we all want, it's good intent, but then the militarism of America, and most of those people just lived and died doing really mundane shit, and that should be celebrated. And if you just turn it into a massive love-in for the not intentionally.
To the people that are exceptional. I mean, I was just in a meeting about this, and I was like, "Oh, we want to, we're going to another cemetery, and we had to get permission to clean headstones." And the cemetery representative was like, "What's special about that person?" And I'm like, "Why does anything have to be special about them?"
See that
like,
is
what did they achieve? Why did they have to achieve anything?
Well, because I think.
Yeah, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that is definitely part of how we culturally learn about entombment, right? Like when we think of the Egyptians, or when these stories of ancient interred humans, like, I mean, truly, truly ancient ones, like the ones in the Andes, where the stuff that they have with them kind of, we have been taught, at least in the mainstream, that those are expressions of their position or wealth when they were alive. And so I think a lot of times people do like have this, there has to be something special as part of the internment.
Yes, but who does that leave out? Like, that leaves out the entire population of enslaved people in the United States, because that's part of the history of slavery, right? They didn't do anything special.
That's the thing.
That's what we're taught. Yeah,
that's what really I think the point is that we this is a deep time thing, seeking for posthumous fame, seeking for memorialization, for immortality. But we've got a particular toxic blend of it, where for heritage tourism purposes, for a public history discourse or public archaeology discourse, we are trying to find the exceptional, the unusual. And this was the woman who fought back. Well, yeah, that's lovely, but what about the many women who couldn't? Or here's the man that did this. Yeah, but what about the many? And it's about, I'm not saying we should not tell those stories, but we've got to be careful of cemeteries not turning into weird internet celebrity, necro-celebrity spaces of the exceptionalism, the individual exceptionalism of, but they, despite their time, they boldly fought against the sectarian divide and married a Catholic or whatever it may be. That's a weird shit to put on your gravestone, but the names alone would tell you that, or the stories of the but you don't want that. I mean, I don't actually worry, but I sometimes think, what the hell is anyone ever going to say about me? And I don't really care at one level, but whatever it is, it won't say anything that's probably accurate or fair, but it will be, and I can't get a right to reply.
Well, you could write your own headstone.
I'll go. And for all those arseholes that are turning up here telling me this, you can, and you're not a Viking.
Yeah, then you have the last word.
Yeah. Before you come at me, I've done.
You're not a Viking is a diabolical fucking gravestone. Holy shit.
I mean, it's Esau Oakman that came up with that, and he's much more sweary than I am. But he basically did that, and I stole it, and people think it's me now. But I think it is it's not fair. I mean, if people want to embrace their Nordic heritage and Scandinavian past, all good. Do what you want. I don't care about that. That's not what it's about.
I'm descended from Vikings. I'm a Viking.
You're right. You're a Viking. We know you're the.
I'm like 50% Viking.
I think that is equivalent. That's almost the same as 100%. Really. I mean, there's very little difference between 50 and 100%. I mean, that's not.
That's what I'm saying. 100%.
I'm a professor. I know that statistics are just made up, so I can say anything. So you are 100% Viking. You embody the Viking ideal, but as we all do in different senses, but you more than most. And the point is that but fine, do what you want, but we're talking about how that can be harmful, but and not everyone's being harmful, but people get very much in their feelings about these things, and yes, there will be very few people who say this and end up in the grave using that as their visual articulation. But I was recently at Upper Wasdale in Cumbria, where there is a small cemetery to St. Olaf, dedicated to St. Olaf, which is in an area of 10th century Old Norse settlement. And the dedication to St. Olaf, the patron saint of Norway, is literally lost in time, going back to the 1970s. It's a brand new, Nordic connection. But in that, what's really fascinating is that cemetery has the churchyard has local people who, but it's also got the burials of the hoteliers who became the mountain guides and became the fell guides for the walkers and the tourists. And it's got all the burials of fell runners and climbers who've died on Scarfell Pike and all this stuff. And they're all graves are there. And I'm thinking their identity is embodied in they died doing what they loved in a very individualistic, often very masculine thing. And they've all gravestones like peaks, like jagged peaks, like to honor the mountains on which they died. And as someone who's not a mountaineer and never done extreme sport, it's a bit batshit. It's a bit weird. It's a bit beyond mannish. It's into the realm of, one could say things about that. And I probably will in the video. Marchella's here, not an expert on graves, but I was thinking about this in terms of nation states. And the other day, yeah, absolutely, Marchella. It works from. And do follow Marchella if you don't already. She's an expert in the classics and debunking the classics. She's got a book coming out actually critiquing the whole study of the ancient world and its Islamophobia. But she's here talking about.
Dr. Marchella should come up because that's actually right in line.
I don't know if you would like to. I shall invite her and see if she has time. That'd be wonderful. But yeah, it works in terms of national memorials and how people's individual graves speak to those discourses. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the necropolitics part, and how and I mean here, like we're seeing, it's like our cemetery, which is we keep finding has more and more of these Civil War veterans. And that, I was thinking about this. It's like a couple years ago, the federal government came out with this thing, like they're going to, dedicated funding to restoring Black soldiers' graves. But you could only get the funding if you were in a national cemetery, which eliminated a huge number of Black soldiers who were buried in the United States because they couldn't be buried in national cemeteries.
So just to for those that are joining us, just to remind you, we're talking about death. We're talking about necropolitics, and so we've got experts from various different perspectives talking about the relationship of cemeteries and history and politics, because cemeteries are records of stories of communities, of nations. And both on the gravestone and the text and the choice of memorial and the funerals they represent, but they also are contested spaces at different levels in different ways. So the micropolitics of management and arguments over who gets buried where and whose gravestone gets remembered, through to how cemeteries become the spotlight of national stories. So I don't know if welcome, Chella. Do you want to add in things at this point?
Yeah, hi everyone. Hi. I don't think I've met people here before, so it's good to see everyone. I'm not going to stay that long because my battery is running out, so I'll be here as long as my battery is here.
Oh, fantastic.
But yeah, I was just thinking about I don't really work on graves at all, though sometimes I work on memorialization in the sense that I work on the way that the ancient world kind of comes to function as a way of memorializing the West and also inventing the West at the same time. But I was thinking, I have this very old dog, and I was walking my dog through this graveyard, and I was thinking, it's so funny because we're so over totalized by the notion of the nation state when people are alive. Like, we're constantly saying, oh, so-and-so is French, so-and-so is German, so-and-so is American. The constant anti-migrant, anti-refugee discourse that's like, oh, he's not really French, or oh, he's not really British, or whatever. Or, this whole constant Islamophobic thing, which is about saying that Muslims have got some other allegiance other than to the nation state, right? Which is then encoded into Islamophobic laws and securitization. And all of that is all about enforcing the idea that the nation state is your most important identifier, and it's a racializer, and all these things. But then I was walking through the cemetery and I was like, yeah, nobody's nationality is actually anywhere, unless you're literally in a military cemetery or something where nationality is everything about how we imagine people's lives. Most people, the things that we remember about people, they all say, who they were married to, or whose father they were, or whose son they were, or, all of that stuff is there. All kinds of other allegiances are marked out on the grave. But I didn't see any kind of national, anything really. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting that we're so obsessed with imposing the nation state as an identity on living people. But then once people have died, like, we're totally okay with the idea that people have all different kinds of ways of describing their identity. I wasn't really sure what to make of it, to be honest. You folks know more than me.
That's interesting. And Alex, in the meeting we were just in with Forest Lawn Cemetery, that's one of the things they're talking about. It's like black people and Black history is largely invisible. And so we have to go to the cemeteries, right, in order to reconstruct communities, buildings, occupations, the history, everything. But if you have an integrated cemetery, then you don't know. They are like, well, we don't know who's Black and who's not in the burial ground, right? And I do in reconstruction of the community through the cemetery, and I'm lucky because I have a Black cemetery, and I get the names from here. But yeah, no, largely you don't have that, except in some places, Connecticut, Massachusetts. It will say somebody was, a slave for 5 generations of somebody's family, right? Yeah.
May I add something here? Because I accidentally have an observation from today on this very issue, because I took a drive this morning, quite a long way for reasons I won't go into, up to into Lancashire, to the very border between Wigan and Greater Manchester. And I was visiting 2 crematoria. I was going to visit some historic cemeteries and crematoria. And I realised I was in a contested landscape because I didn't think about it, because my geography of Greater Manchester is pretty poor, actually. And I realised I was entering into the territory of the recent by-election, which elected Andy Burnham as Labour, and potentially, I don't know the latest. Is he yet been coronated? But anyway, whatever's happening with Andy Burnham, he faced off a challenge from the far-right Reform UK party. And of course, what's really interesting is not even a week on, there's hardly any Labour stickers up. It's all Reform UK, because for these minority of far right people, it's a badge of honour. The flags are up, the English flags, the landscape, the livings landscape is still a landscape of anger and tension and symbols and protest, and it's racial, and it is racialised. Don't care what people say. Some people deny it, but it's a racialised, contested landscape. And then I entered, and literally the road leading to Wigan Crematorium and Cemetery is just populated by Reform UK flags. And then I enter the cemetery. It's exactly what Chella's just saying. You enter the cemetery. Now there's 3 qualifiers: War Memorial, Commonwealth War Graves, maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission of those that died on active duty, in the British military. And the third one is football fans wanting England flags on their graves. Those are the only qualifiers. The rest, suddenly you enter in a space where I don't think it was a particularly pretty cemetery, but it was interesting. But death is suddenly an equalizer, and it kind of is a really, in that climate of just a few days after the Makefield by-election, suddenly you realise, oh look, it's almost the only sane space in the landscape. It's the only place where you get some kind of,
peace.
From the visual symbolic rhetorics of a country trying to pull itself apart, and
that's not true in America though. Like, Confederate flags are a common grave marker, and what
Really?
gets me, and this is part of why I almost want an emoji. You're muted, Rachel.
I said, so are American flags.
Well, but it means the same shit to the dead, right? Like,
it's not about the dead though, is it? Really? That's worse.
It is for them, because they're talking about symbols of dead people. Like, those aren't symbols that, like, I saw the Welsh flag on somebody's maybe bard, and like I do think that for dead people, for the gone, almost all of those national flags are kind of symbols of hate in the long term, like, interpretation. Like, I don't mean it that's what you mean, but if someone's looking at like a gravestone or a bunch of gravestones that have like a nation's flag on it, nations don't stay.
Mm-hmm.
right? They're not there forever, you know, and so you're kind of making a commitment to something else. I
Yeah,
almost
I mean,
want emoji.
historically, people have like, their organizations, their churches, they'll have religion or something like that on their headstone. They don't, historically have a flag.
Well, I think in Britain it's slightly different in the sense that I think if you're in an English cemetery and someone's got a St George cross on their grave, that's kind of weird. If you're in Scotland or Wales, I mean, the local Welsh crematorium, the memorials there, they have a very strict policy against memorialisation. There's no gravestones. There's no memorials in the space. It's a very socialist. Had very strict, when they set it up in the 60s, they had a very socialist view that the cremation, the gardens of remembrance are for scattering ashes. You can leave flowers, but no text. But they have a memorial wall where you can add little, and literally 1 in 4 or 5 has a Welsh dragon, the Dry Goch. And I don't think anyone would say in that context they're hate symbols. They are about affinity to place, language, culture, identity. I'm not saying it's neutral. I'm not saying oh, we're better in Wales. It's a nice soft nationalism. There's many hateful aspects to it, but it doesn't have the same baggage, I think, as the English flag. I don't know if Bard Lucy would disagree with me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I know. I just.
So I should actually say that the reason why I have my saltire and the shamrock together is to denote my country, which is Scotland, which is as old as England. Some would say older, and that flag has been there for much longer than the Union Jack, certainly.
Oh yeah.
But also the shamrock denotes my community affiliation. So Hiberno Scottish or the Irish Scottish community. So we're a distinct community within Scotland with its own history. And I think that, I mean, the whole symbology of emojis is a whole, that is, at some point, somebody will do a PhD thesis on it, like some point in the future. But we do use symbols as a shorthand to convey certain things. If someone dying around about this time had a saltire on their grave festooned with, like unicorns without the chains on and things like that, we can actually surmise a lot about what that person believed and was struggling, striving for.
Oh, we've got some background noise there. I don't know. Yeah.
So I think it's very much.
I think it's Reverend Ben. Thank you, Reverend Ben. Thank you. Yeah.
So I think, I think it very much depends on whether the flag that you are using has been co-opted by the far right or not. And that's the thing, is that you should never. I'm hearing English people a lot express real sorrow. Like I already feel like a dick for having a St George's cross, and all I want to do is support England in the World Cup. Okay.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, like it's context matters. So, like a Wiltshire parish church with a flag of St George flying from it, and it has done for many decades, is not some symbol of race hate, but equally, it's not neutral. It is about faith, about nation. It's about patriotism. It's not a neutral symbol, but it is about the parish rhetorically articulating its patriotism. But there's a spectrum, isn't there? And someone like flying 50 flags, from the front of their house, and having their dog painted or whatever mad shit people do, that you're into territory of going, oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But I get that. And Alex and I were just talking about this kind of the other day. It was like, until I, read the 1619 Project, I didn't really get, why would, as a Black person, why would you have an American flag? Why would you have an American flag? And then, but it being like, okay, so if we have all of these symbols that mean something and they're taken by people that hate us, right? Then we're losing in a major way. We're losing if they get to have that representation to themselves.
mean, this is why I would say is that you need to far right get a hold of your cultural symbols, and a really good example of this is actually something like the cone-hatted, bed-sheeted people in the southern United States took a Scottish symbol, a symbol of Scottish resistance, okay, something that was used throughout the medieval period to bring communities together to resist an oppressor or a foreign invading army. They took it, they warped it, and now we ourselves are robbed of that symbol. We can't use it in any kind of Scottish resistance movements. We can't, because over in the US, some bed-sheeted, cone-hatted people got a hold of
some assholes.
Yeah. Well, that's the challenge with American dominance of our discussions, is that it's a blessing, of course. We get many of our insights and our discussions from American-led academia, but it also can inhibit us understanding that nuance of application. But when we're on the digital space, we cannot ignore what is happening in South Carolina or Kentucky, because it's been co-opted. What's been co-opted there has been co-opted around the world by these scumballs, and that's the problem. I mean, I think I want to ask Chella's what point, and this may be, I don't want to make it too specific, but just to see if she's got any insights into this. Obviously, when times of this conflict, I talked about the conflict in the British public space. There's protests. There's obviously, should we say, some interesting government policies about how protests are categorized and groups that are trying to protest on particular issues. But we also have in the background, as well as identifiable religious minorities targeted, we also have their cemeteries, very distinguishable. And local authority, a lot of work goes behind the scene. I'm not trying to commend, they don't always get it right, but a lot of work goes on behind the scene to try and keep an eye on this for particularly Muslim communities, Jewish communities, and other groups that have distinctive burial spaces. Vandalism is happening, but it's not being reported on purpose. And I kind of know some of this, but not everything, because it's deliberately being suppressed, not out of denial, but because they know it's so incendiary and it will. But these areas are very prone to being co-opted into these discourses, and cemeteries are not a neutral space. And I don't know if you have any experiences or thoughts on that. Certainly no one in the UK, I feel, is ever. I mean, can I just, before the final thing is, a couple of years ago when we had, of course, the BLM, and we had suggestions in the UK that we take down some of the most egregious statues to egregious people, both the statues are egregious and the subjects are egregious. Then the patriots were defending war memorials that no one ever said they were going to touch. So, I mean, I think many protesters have been very keen to keep away from those spaces because they know that it will just simply spiral. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that whole cemeteries and memorials as contested spaces that you'd like to share, Taylor.
Well, I was thinking about, I guess two things. One is I was thinking about what Rachel and Bard-Lisa were just saying about taking back flags and those kinds of symbols from the far right or from nationalism. I was thinking about the fact that that's something that you see at the pro-Palestine demonstrations. You see, first of all, something that's not at all a national movement, right? Grouped around the Palestinian flag. People who carry that flag are not saying anything about their own identity. They're talking about a political movement, liberation movement that they're part of. But you also see the attempt at those demonstrations to take the St. George's flag back from the right, because you'll often see the flagpole, the double flagpole that has, I think the most common one that you see is Irish and Palestinian flags on a double flagpole. But you now increasingly, I think because of that solidarity, you'll see also, the St. George's flag. And it's interesting because when that first started appearing, people were sort of like, are you sure you've not gone to the wrong side of the demonstration, buddy? What's kind of going on there? But actually, I think what that is and they've now had sort of flags, St. George's flags printed with things like Black Lives Matter or Palestinian Lives Matter, or, there's this kind of deliberate attempt to take the St. George's flag back. But then when you were just mentioning war memorials, I was thinking about the manufactured outrage around the cenotaph in London. Every single time there's a big pro-Palestine demo in London, somebody will say, oh my goodness, they're going to destroy the cenotaph, they're going to, and this is part of trying to characterize pro-Palestinian demonstrations as Islamist, because it's part of this long-standing kind of Islamophobic trope that what Islamists do is destroy, the great monuments of Western civilization. Sorry, someone's asking what's the cenotaph. It's the big war memorial that's like in the middle of London, which various politicians, Suella Braverman, I think, was the first one to do it, will raise their alarm, whenever the pro-Palestine demonstration is supposed to go past it, because they will say it's obvious that this is, as well as being pro-Palestine, it must therefore be anti-British, and therefore it's going to destroy this big war memorial in London, which of course has never happened, right? No pro-Palestine demonstration has ever actually done that. The people who have damaged the cenotaph in London are, Tommy Robinson's gang, who frequently turn up looking for a fight, and when they find no one to fight, they go destroying everywhere around them. But the pro-Palestine demonstrations have never done that. So it's this kind of phantom thing, which is the way that we position this group as kind of anti-British is by suspecting them of attacking this memorialization of British loss of life, right? So it's part of a way of positioning this as anti-British is by fabricating this concern that they're going to do something that actually they were never going to do in the first place.
I think, can I just jump in and say, Alex, when I say deliberately suppressed, I think a lot of religious minorities, when they work with the police and other local authorities, are trying to ensure that even if there is vandalism, it doesn't get a point of stoked outrage, so that it doesn't become the manufactured, it doesn't get this kind of tit for tat manufactured. So then, oh, look, something's been done to a Christian cemetery. It must be those, and then before you know it, that they're trying to keep a lockdown on that by consensus. I sense, I don't have a direct insight into that, because exactly of what Chella's saying, that any discussion of this suddenly becomes, they're going to start ripping up this, and it just creates this drama
and it becomes civilizational, right? It becomes, we are unable, and this is a kind of standard Islamophobic trope, we're unable to see something as an attack by someone on something. All of a sudden it becomes written into this logic of the clash of civilizations, where we're like, this is Muslims against the West, this is the West against the East, it becomes part of this imaginary battle of the clash of these civilizations, East and West, that's been going on since the beginning of time. It becomes mythologized. There's no way to stop it from being part of that myth making of racism.
Yeah. Even though many of these war memorials have the names of Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and many atheists and many other on them, people want to sort of claim it as some kind of Christian nationhood thing. Yes, they will have a cross, many of them as the primary symbol of sacrifice as much as of faith. And so, but, again, it shows they want to reduce any nuance and create this contested landscape. But I wondered if I may ask the Reverend Ben whether he's had any insights from an American Norse pagan perspective or Norse heathen perspective on cemeteries and how much they matter or they don't matter for some of the newer faiths, or newer in the sense of, I don't want to say anything insensitive, reconstituted or regenerated faiths. Is that a fair way to characterize whether cemeteries are less important because they know that they're invested in those more established faiths, or are they actually places where people want to express? I've seen certainly gravestones of people who want to articulate their Norse faith, but it's obviously much less common because the faith is less common. I don't know, however, if there's any generalization to be had there.
Thank you, Howard, for asking. Yes, cemeteries are important, but as you point out, there's a lot of difficulty in getting them established. The largest organizations that we have in the United States for Norse pagans, those large organizations are really no larger than a single Christian congregation, typically, like 400, 500 people. We don't have quite the numbers of like an Ásatrúarfélagið, which in Iceland, they're a lot more centralized. They have, I think like 10,000 members or something like that now. But they have a much more centralized ethos. Like, they're working together to build cemeteries, to build a temple, to do all that kind of stuff. And they can do that because, for one thing, there are more numbers. And for another, they are more concentrated. Iceland is a lot smaller than the United States. For us, we're quite spread out. That doesn't mean we aren't going to try to have cemeteries, and that would mean a great deal to us if we did have a cemetery. But it's a problem of geography, and it's a problem of numbers, not a problem of faith, really. It is certainly something we want to do.
That's wonderful to hear. Can I ask a follow-up question, please, about whether if the geographical and numerical and practical issues could be overcome, would there be a genuine fear of the more extreme evangelical Christian zeal and stereotypes of Norse pagans, meaning that this would have to be very heavily security heavy? There would be a lot of concerns for security. I don't know if that's even got to that point of discussion.
Well, it's funny you should ask, because the very few spaces that we do have, and I can't say that we don't have some temple spaces out there. There are private temples that people have built all over the United States, but they're not publicly known, and precisely because of what you're talking about. It's precisely because of there's a fear of rising Christian nationalism and people feeling emboldened to, take down a pagan site or vandalize it in some way to make a point. Don't know what point they think they're making, but it's people will try to make it if they know that there's something out there. Another is, I think we, Norse pagans specifically, I think we are in a really unique position in that we are actually preyed upon. By people who claim our faith, right? Like, so people who are, we would say, universalist in doctrine. That is to say that we welcome every single person. We believe that every person can be Norse pagan. We believe the gods call whom they will. Those of us who believe that and live our lives by that and welcome all, we are under attack by the people who believe that it ought to be closed and ought to be only restricted to white people only. We are under attack by those people, and it is partially, I even say it's more so out of worry for those people, either vandalizing or destroying that property, that we don't keep those places public. It's a real shame.
Thank you. I've just opened it up to anyone else on the panel who'd like to.
It's so interesting. I mean, just looking at, I was looking at that, the whole Viking ship coming into the Chicago World Fair, and I've always felt very strongly, however you want to look at it, that the entire system that we have going on here and the whole construction of whiteness itself in the United States, everyone loses from that. Everyone loses. You lose faith, you lose identity, you lose history, you lose cultural heritage, and that is, like I said earlier, jokingly, that I'm Viking, right? But that's because 50% of my family is Norwegian and Swedish, and looking at that moment, that making, because Swedish people weren't white either at that time when you have the Chicago World's Fair. They were Swedes. They were dumb Swedes, they were this other thing in the racial imagination and doctrine of the United States. So yeah, I think the people that are invested in that whiteness, they have to control whiteness as well as every other racial minority, right? Like, you can't invite everybody in.
I mean, I'd like to hear from Bard Lucy on this as well. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Yeah, just to say, we're approaching. I do want to sort of just pick up something that Rachel said there. Because white supremacy is a structure, the target minority is swapped out at the bottom. You leave the pyramid in place, the target minority can be swapped depending on who is it in the giant game of tag. And but I just want to sort of pick up on something that Reverend Ben has said here. We're really approaching the first generation of pagans to be passing away. The pagan community is a very young faith community. And in Scotland, probably Norse pagans are one of the largest demographics in that. What I've actually noticed is there's almost like a period of sort of like mad experimentation going on with mortuary practices in general, as the pagan community articulates death and dying. So, for example, I've heard of one person who she bid farewell to her husband, and all his friends like built a Viking boat, and they built a Norse, like a replica of a Norse boat, and they burned the boat with his. They'd already got his ashes back from the crematorium, but they actually burned his ashes again in the boat, as part of a community, a community practice. And I'm finding this sort of like ongoing conversation about mortuary practice, and the way in which death and dying is articulated within the landscape. It is an ongoing conversation. It is an ongoing thing where people are kind of experimenting with sort of like taking ideas from the past and sort of rearticulating them for now. Because there are very, very few, like most people are cremated these days in these islands. There's not as much burial as there was before, and so people are looking for ways to mark and memorialize their loved ones where there are no places where they can visit. You can't visit a grave in most places. So the other thing that I've noticed is a resurgence of clutie practices in Scotland. So I did a video on this ages ago. I might go and do another one, but in Scotland, people will there'll be a fairy garden, and people will like go and tie a clutie for the fairies. Okay, go and tie clutie. But always in Scotland, in the folk practice, the animist practice, and it always happens, and it's not anything consciously done, is people will start leaving memorial poetry or pictures of their loved ones who are deceased as well. It's not that the loved ones are the fairies, it's that the ancestors and the fair folk are wound in together within Scottish folk memorial practice. Yeah. And so you're seeing this sort of like renegotiation or rearticulation of these really quite old folk beliefs back into the landscape, as the churchyard has kind of almost become like a rare occurrence in Scotland, as a way of people sort of like commemorating their loved ones and going on. So you're seeing like constant rearticulation, constant experimentation with this kind of thing. But as far as the pagan community is going, like we're still trying to figure it out. Like what do we do? How do we mark the passing of our loved ones? How are we going to move into this sort of like and reforge sort of connections with in newer faith systems or reconstructive faith systems?
And this is where archaeology comes in, if I may say so, because from my experience, a lot of pagans will prefer to go to eschew traditional funerary spaces, municipal, secular, or of faith, and prefer ancient monuments. Now, with my archaeological hat on, I would not encourage people to scatter ashes at archaeological sites, because it destroys, pollutes the archaeological record. But equally, with my other hat on, I'm fascinated by this practice. I see it everywhere, ash scattering at ancient monuments. And just so you know, I would never dare to touch any ritual litter, as it's called, and deny, because while I would not encourage that either, I know a lot of those objects are placed with as expressions of faith, but also to memorialize loved ones. And so I never touch anything, even recent finds. I have a few archaeological friends who will say, "Oh, I always remove this stuff." And I'm, what? No, don't. That's not your decision. Unless you're the actual heritage manager of those sites. But I'm interested in it. So I have two sites. On one level, I would never touch or disrespect any acts people leave, but I wouldn't call it vandalism either, even though I know that it's damaging the archaeological site, because I think it's part of the dynamics of this site's use and its significance. I'll shut up. Anyone else like to?
That's it. It's interesting.
I'm curious if people are documenting that.
Some and informally.
Yeah.
I've done blog posts only for me, but other people have done more work on it. Yeah. So Chella and Rachel, I don't know which order you want to go in.
You go first, Rachel. I think you were first.
You go first.
Okay, well that could go on a long time, so I'll just go. I was thinking about, like, as you were talking about, Lucy, I was thinking about what the kind of one step back question here, which is like, what or who is memorialization actually for? Because I was thinking about, we're talking about memorialization as a process of kind of projecting the dead into the future, in a sense, or sort of creating some kind of future memory. But then I'm thinking about, all of those groups, and Muslims are one of them, that deliberately have unmarked graves. I mean, one of the things that's like so that like really is painful when you go to somewhere like Srebrenica, which is the site of the Bosnian genocide, is that you see like thousands and thousands and thousands of graves, but they're all unmarked. I mean, they're marked in the sense that they've got like a kind of post on each of the graves, but there's the names are not on the graves themselves. There is, and part of the reason for that is because we don't know all of the names, but there is a list of names somewhere else, but it's not on the graves themselves. And I'm also thinking about the fact that the idea of those kinds of memorial practices in Islam seem to me to be not so much about remembering this person into the future, but actually about reminding you of the shortness of life. Because one of the most interesting things to me about the way that Muslims still do death is, so before every Muslim call to prayer, all 5 of the daily prayers and also all of the ceremonial ones on things like Eid, there's something called in Arabic an adhan, which means like a call to prayer that says the prayer is going to happen, and the imam will call it. At your janazah, which is your funeral prayer, is the only one that doesn't have a call to prayer. And the reason that it doesn't have a call to prayer is because you had a call to prayer when you were born. So the first thing that happens to a Muslim child when they're born is someone reads the call to prayer in their ear. And the call to prayer that was read to you when you were born is actually the call to prayer for your funeral prayer, right? So it's about this like reminder of how short life is, rather than a kind of sense of how can we make this memorial last forever. There's a kind of thing about that things don't stay forever, right? The kind of fleetingness of lives and things within the kind of bigger plan for the world. So I'm just thinking about, that bigger question around like, what is memorialization for? And does that differ among different groups? Is it the case that everybody wants memorials to project the dead into the future, or can memorials do other things like remind us of, the shortness of life in regard to like maybe the hereafter or something? I'm just thinking about those differences.
Well, sometimes they're gateways too, or doorways, and that's not like projecting into the future. That's a permanent doorway, or for however long it lasts, right?
Yeah, I agree. And also, just to add, I think for a lot of people, it's about not projecting into the far future. It's about the immediate, ongoing, continuing bonds of days, weeks, months, years of dealing with loss. When people think of memorialization, I do think there is the way it's easy to slide into seeing it as about in perpetuity. Most of these memorials are.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm going to drop out.
Oh,
I
thank
love
you.
it
That
here.
one really great to. Thank you for your input. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Take care. So I just wanted to say that yes, I think a lot of this is not even in the Muslim graves. I think it is about that immediate, and also many secular, Christian, and other faiths too. It's about those immediate processes of bereavement, rather than this will stay, the world will end and be remade, and still the memorial will be, yeah. Don't know.
I don't know if anyone's brought it up, but the Kemetic ritual, the Egyptian ritual for the preparation of the dead, is actually about more in the sense of continuing life, right? It's not even just a memorial to, it's about the continuation of life. They continue to live in the hereafter. And so all of the preparations that they go through, all of the ceremonies that have to be performed in such a specific way in order to reach the hereafter, so that they can continue to have that life.
No one's brought it up, and welcome, Seraphima. Lovely to see you here. And, we've had Ben talking about the Norse pagan already, the dispersed geographical nature of North America and Norse pagans, meaning they're not in the same situation as in Iceland. I don't know if you had anything additional to add about from a, I don't know, specifically Norse pagan or more generally pagan. I mean, Bart Lucy's also been talking about the challenge of, we're still early days for a conversation about, is there a pagan, formal way of death going to emerge in terms of spaces, places, memorials, or do you think that's not really the priority?
I think so. I think that we're already seeing signs of it. If you look at specifically like American military grave sites where they have like huge monuments, there are many of them that are etched with a Mjolnir on them now, because they have listed that Norse pagan is there, or heathen, or I don't know what the actual terminology is for the Americans, but they've listed that as their chosen faith. And so when their memorial stone is created, there is the emblem of the Mjolnir on it, which is already kind of indicative.
Is the symbol. Yeah.
Is the symbol. And that's kind of already indicative of kind of this neo-pagan approach to funerals, to memory, to all of these things. Bard Lucy would be far more than me, but many Celtic pagans, and they also have a different kind of tradition when it comes to funerals. While it does kind of hearken to a very Catholic formula, the words are very different and the meaning is very different. And so it kind of takes on a different life when it comes to those kinds of funerals. I've seen them also. Wiccan funerals are also done quite differently. There is a ceremony that is performed at the funeral of somebody who was Wiccan by their either their coven or their immediate family or whomever. And I think that going forward, we probably will see more instances of quote unquote alternative spirituality being reflected in how we memorialize people.
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that I've noticed is that there is, within some traditions of paganism, certainly my own and also some Wiccans, of burying or saying goodbye to the loved one, the coven mate, the ritual partner, at the highest of what their office would have been. This is one of the things that I've noticed is, so if someone was, say, like a baby bard, they would be buried as an olive, because that would have been the potential that they could have reached. And like somebody was also explaining to me that, you're buried at the higher grade. If you're a Wiccan initiate and you die before you get through all your grades, you'll be said goodbye to as the potential that you would have reached. So there's this idea of potential being honored, or the path cut short being honored as well. I've just what you were saying about rituals. Sorry, I've got my computer coming on and off here. What you were saying about the ritual sites that you were that some of your archaeology friends were saying, you always remove the memorial tat that's kind of left around. But some of us actually have a practice involved in the ritual cleanup of of these sites, which honor. So if you are at the site, okay, there's usually some pagan kicking about there who may know somebody who has a ritual practice involved in disposal of memorial items, or replacing them. I've done that, where I've rewoven plastic cluties. If someone's tied a clutie with plastic thing, and I've replaced the clutie with a biodegradable thing so that it's in line with the actual animistic practice. But it's very, very hard spiritual work. I had to have a spirit worker come and light a fire afterwards and and all these things. You're working with other people's grief, memory, intention, this kind of thing. So all of these practices are being worked out real time. And it is very interesting to see, both as a scholar and as a practitioner, this kind of like this dual lens that I look at a practice or a landscape or an articulation as. So yeah, it's very it is very interesting in many ways.
Can I circle back to Rachel, who encouraged me to start this conversation, and ask her about how these different faiths play out in black cemeteries, because I kind of sense that there'd be a lazy default to assume we're mainly talking about Christian or atheist or not or non-declared in some way. But of course, massive black Muslim community, black pagan community. You know, it's not a simple. There's nothing simple about these things. So, have you any reflections on that, Rachel? How the politics of religion intersect with racial categorizations and?
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at that. Most of the symbols on our, military headstones that we have here, the symbols are going to be Christian for the most part from the 1800s, and early 1900s, but the a lot of the symbols are fraternal organizations, mutual aid groups. Yeah, like small. Some of them, I mean, a lot of them, I am continuing to research and figure out what they are, because there's not a lot of information that's out there about the smaller, more local groups. And like Daughters of Samaria was the first one that I found here, and on a woman's headstone, and it kind of told her whole story, and with her starting this Daughters of Samaria, and I was like, what's the Daughters of Samaria? And in this case, it's not the larger, more well-known organization, which I think is like Sons and Daughters, or Fraternal something or other, Samaria. So yeah, that's what we mostly see, either Christian ones, and in this cemetery, that's like when you get into, by the time you're into the 1940s, then you have in the black cemetery that's here as well, then you have like there's a Muslim section, there's like, and they have different things there, but because this is mostly 19th. Yeah.
Yes. I have to just interject to remind people that we are talking about necropolitics, sensitive topics, but really got some great panelists here, great people who have insights and expertise across disciplines, and really grateful that you've all joined us. And if anyone would like to join us or ask questions, or drop your questions in the comments below in the chat. I'm really bad at these lives of reminding people of this stuff, but I also have to say,
and tapping and tap
the screen, interact. We've got goals, we've got targets or whatever. No, I don't know what that means. But, do all the stuff. What does my favorite rabbi say? Tap that screen like you tap that ass. I don't know. I can't get away with saying that, can I? That sounds disturbing, but there you are. I've done it now, so I blame the Rebel Rabbi for that. Whatever, get involved, think about this, because cemeteries are better for almost every community, religious, cultural, and the only thing that's annoyed me about this live is that the AI summaries seem to be, actually, to my annoyance, generally accurate. The latest one is discussing how religion and relates shape death and memorialization. Curse you, AI summary. I usually mock you, and yet now you're being actually really helpful.
Now you're intelligent. Yes.
I don't like
it. But no, seriously, thank you all for your sharing this. I don't know where we go from here, really. We've had a really good discussion so far. We could wrap it up, but if people want to take it into ask any further questions of Rachel and Alex, who work with these cemeteries. Yeah, go on.
Yes, and that was the one that we like in our chat when we were talking about this. It's like really because for me, I've been staying here, traveling here. It's 5 years. We just got on the National Historic Register.
Wonderful. You're authorized now. Yeah. You're real. You exist.
Ish. As a Black History site, that's we had some,
and the federal government can find us easier.
Yes, we had some hesitation about like, is this something that we want to do, or is this going to make us a target, or that kind of stuff right now in the US. But it's the question really is that working in and residing essentially with the dead has profoundly changed me and changed how I see things. And I'm curious about how if other people have experienced that as well. And if so, in what ways? I mean, I think, and the question came up again when I was looking at when Howard and I just did an interview, and then I was looking at some of the Viking stuff and things he's published on his blog. And it's like that it kind of makes you more radical in my mind. Like you're not as willing to just be like, yeah, well, this stuff happens and you can, go along with it. It's not, I feel like it changes you. So that's my question.
Anyone else want to pitch in?
I want to jump in and try to probably not answer your question because I don't work with dead people, but I do work with like a lot of dead languages and a lot of societies that are said to be dead, right? I'm notionally a scholar of the ancient Greeks and Romans. And so something that I say all the time is that I think working with stuff that is long dead and not when I say stuff, I don't just mean objects. I mean like working with like ways of being, ways of making society, certain kinds of practices, ways of understanding gender, for example, that simply are not the same, ways of formulating race, right, that come from a world pre-race science. So before whiteness, before blackness was associated with enslavement, but because of the Atlantic slave trade, like all of this stuff fundamentally destabilizes the world in which we live. And something that I think about all the time is that I'm an ancient historian, but that doesn't mean I live in the past. Actually, it means I live in a present that is surrounded by all the different presents that could have been possible. Because one of the things that you can do if you spend your life with the long dead is you can see like crystal clear that the way our world is now is only one of the ways that world could have been. And there are like millions and millions and millions of different possible formulations. And so I think it's interesting that you say that it kind of made you radical. I actually think that knowledge makes me really political because it makes me like really ask the question, so why was it then that this racist world order that we live in became, established as something that would rule the world? Why did white supremacy happen? Why did queerphobia happen? Why did all these things happen? Why did Islamophobia become systematized in the way that the West governs, and why did the West and the East come to exist? Why does Western supremacy exist? And the answer to all of those questions is actually that certain powerful factors took all of the different ways that history could be and selected one way and projected that one way as if it were the only way possible that we could live, right? So what you get if you work with long dead stuff is you get to open up all the doors that were closed, right? All the doors that were closed by those hegemonic powers that made those things the only way that we could be get reopened by the ancient past, because you get to have this moment of being like, oh, so the Greeks did this and that's different to what we did. And that doesn't mean it's better or worse, right? I'm bored of the conversation of like whether the Greeks were good or bad, but which you seem to have like all the time at the moment. And I'm bored with it because we're talking about a society that ran on the enslavement of people. I'm not about to start arguing that they were all so good. I mean, that's nonsense. But you get to kind of open up all these doors that otherwise are closed. And that brings you this kind of political radicalism that is like, no, this isn't the way the world has to be. The world was made in this way. So yeah, I think it makes me radical too, Rachel, even though I don't think that my dead are the same as your dead, maybe.
I 100% wholeheartedly agree. 10 out of 10.
I've been long thinking about my own relationship with death and the dead, and all I will say is that I've long been aware of cemeteries. I remember as a young child being aware of cemeteries close to where I went to school and my communities and so on, and that's fine. But my point is that now that I live in a former coal mining Welsh village, North Welsh village, my Welsh family are South Walian coal miners. So this is an alien. This is the wild north of Wales. This isn't. But I had a great aunt from Wrexham. So at one level I've got a claim to the north, but the north is other for me in terms of my upbringing as South Walian connections. But still, in this kind of community, a very Christian, non-conformist community in terms of its structure and origins. A lot of it decimated, a lot of it transformed. There's, most people aren't aware, but I know where the war memorial is. I know where the cemetery is, and it's made me radical, but it's also made me much more hyper conservative, simultaneously. And what I mean that is, I used to indulge the privilege of thinking that these are spaces that don't matter, and they are foibles. And if there's a bit of vandalism, who cares? And if there's a bit of neglect, who cares? And I've become much more small c conservative, I should say, in that, realizing that is a luxury that we can't have. I used to think, well, heritage conservation and management issues, it's not really, it's not sexy, it's not cool, not interesting. It's more about the interpretation and the multiple layers of interpretation and the biographies of sites. I still do that stuff. That's my core. But I've become much more realizing that is a privilege that if I was in a community of a particular faith group or a spiritual group, or one that's been marginalized and wants to reconnect to those areas, you can't treat it as trivial. You can't treat it as just, there's different interpretations. It's all a bit post-structuralist. It's all just a bit floaty. You've got to say, it doesn't matter. It may be just someone, like we've just had the headlines in North Wales 2 days ago, someone driving a 4x4 over a Bronze Age burial mound. Well, in the grander scheme of things, there's whole cities and communities decimated by aerial bombardment. That kind of doesn't matter. But in the context of the landscape in which I'm in, that matters, and it should matter. And I used to be a lot more dismissive of that, and a bit more. So I'm becoming small c conservative in a way, simultaneously, that's a more radical thing that I'm becoming. That does matter more. And I used to be a little bit more dismissive of it. Does that kind of make sense? So
well, it does. For me, it's a weird term because you're like, it's more conservative. And
yeah, I know. I deliberately used that term
really?
more invested in the preservation of historic spaces, and and they're caring about their maintenance is what I mean.
Well, I mean, it may be, but it matters. It's like, yeah, I didn't really care either. Like, why do the dead matter to the living? Like, we're suffering, if you're suffering, if you can be, if your life is worthless enough that it's streamed across the world, right? What do the dead matter? And that's something that has completely changed for me, is that it's like that because we're so deliberately, because our dead are so deliberately erased and removed from the landscape.
No, exactly. And that's why I was saying it was my privilege to think that didn't matter as much as other people thought it mattered. And I sort of refined my view quite rapidly, realizing that I can't be someone on a global digital platform and just go, so that's been damaged, never mind. For me, and so that means I've said some unpopular things on this platform, not because I think that the privileged and the white supremacist discourses, we should mourn the loss of these places that are monuments to suffering and indignity and of people, but that we need to think about what we do with them that's what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. It's like with the Confederate monuments, it's like, if you just, at this point, to me, if you just remove them all, right? Which this is, I don't like them, but if you just remove them all, then we don't have evidence of what they created, right?
Yeah.
I have a suggestion. As a Scot, I feel as though I am obliged to say this, but have you thought of traffic cones?
Traffic cones are the way.
I love traffic cones.
We know that Boston's going to keep doing that, But the reason why I bring it up, I do actually have a serious thing, is although the Scots have kind of made it like they coned every statue in the whole Boston.
Coneheads. Yeah.
Originally, that practice was on one particular statue. That was the Duke of Wellington, who was like this British brand. Was kind of imposed on us as this sort of very imperial imagery. And it was his statue that was selected for the coning experiment. And no matter how many times the local authority took that cone off him, he got reconed. And what that has done is actually it's taken the sting out of the memorial or the civic polytheism really of 19th century statues. I mean, they were definitely harking back to earlier civic polytheisms of Greece and Rome when they made these statues in the first place. These are the gods of empire, the fetishes of empire. And when the people of Glasgow coned the statue of the Duke of Wellington, that was then the memorial re-articulated within the landscape according to local culture. So I'm just saying, if you cannot get rid of your Confederate general statues, cones might be an option.
Yeah, so we're in the age where... Go on.
Can I want to ask a question, because what do the cones mean?
In the original statue, the cone was a kind of like middle finger to the British Empire and to stuffy authority. So it was like an anti-imperial, but also a lot of humour, a kind of satire of empire, I suppose.
So, yeah, I mean, if I was going to break that down, say traffic cones, right, have long been moved by drunk people late at night into funny places, right? So it's like a kind of deliberate. It looks drunken, but it's deliberate. So it's playing on the idea that this is like, oh, just someone random, but they're not doing it as a deliberate drunken thing or a dare. They're doing it as a taking off that idea of drunken people put something silly on a statue, but actually it's been turned into a protest. So it's humorous. It's threatening, but not threatening. It's within the bounds of, and so we're in a landscape where protest through plastic spraying and projecting is the strategy. And for me, plastic cones are one thing better than spraying, because people, even if it's impermanent, spraying causes upset. It gives a sense of permanent damage. But projecting has been a really powerful protest media, projecting on images onto things, animation onto things. We saw that with the Trump swamp thing in Washington. We see it with led by donkeys in the UK, projecting the Epstein story onto Windsor Castle. I know that's more high funding, but these are ways in which we can protest without damage, and can be actually, for the media world, for the internet age, incredibly powerful, damning, condemnations of elite privilege and so on. But anyway, I'm talking too much.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that, but the Scots coning the statues in Boston, that then kind of like took the practice on a little bit further. So they weren't really mocking Boston in any way. It was more bringing this aspect of Scottish culture and then into a new landscape, into a new space. But it was also, they couldn't do that in Miami. Boston had the Scottish and Irish connection that allowed that articulation there. When the Scots tried to do the same thing in Miami, it was like the police were guarding the statues. So, like, there's, it was, like, I don't follow football.
Can you just go, what were they? What was happening in Boston? Because I missed this.
So the Scottish football, or they're called the Tartan Farmers. So they bring merriment with them. So in this case, they invaded Boston, drank 3 times their weight in beer, outdrank St. Patrick's Day in Boston. Boston ran out of beer, and they took the custom of coning statues that comes from Glasgow, which is very much a kind of anti-imperial thing. And then they did that in Boston. So they put traffic cones on top of all of the Boston statues as a way of saying like the Scots have arrived. And they did like really theatrical coning of George Washington. But it is interesting that they did that in Boston with this huge Scottish and Irish community, this continuity of culture. But when they tried to do the same thing in Miami, with a statue in Miami, the cops were there with blaring sirens and little cone speakers going like, get down off the statues, and the Miami folks were not impressed with it, and that's because the culture is different, and because of course the statues in the South are statues in the South. They have a very different meaning in the South and people have a different relationship to their statues. In the South.
Even though we have the same statues in the North as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is interesting. The lost cause statues, we have them here too.
So is it true to say they're not being taken down systematically then? There's a
they're being put back up now.
Right, okay.
Yeah, even the ones that were taken down are being restored. So that's where we're at with that now. And new ones are going up too. Because now it's even more firmly in the rhetoric that the Confederates were true Americans. They're American heroes.
Hooray!
Which
war who are they fighting against again? Sorry, yeah. Sorry. History is difficult for me. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Trying to make sense of it. It's kind of.
Yeah, that's so
defending their states' rights.
Yeah, sure.
From an aggressive.
For the United States, they were defending states' rights for the United States.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, it all makes sense now.
Yeah, it's just so. We just messed up, and I was watching this, so much with not realizing that how important commemoration is in making memory, and that it has just entirely created a myth that it controls everything. And I was watching this interview, and I'm gonna blank because it's what I do with names of the living. I can't remember names of the living. So I was watching the man who did the lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. It was like a week ago. He did an interview with Mother Jones, and it's on YouTube. But he was talking about how he really believes that memorialization process and what we see in the landscape, and other people say this too, but it's like the civil rights movement, Reconstruction, every battle that's been kind of won and everything that's been gained could never succeed because there was no memorialization in the landscape. Our geographies of the geographies in the United States erased that. They erased what happened and celebrated a myth that perpetuates hate.
And this is, I must say, my attitude towards this traditional memorial moving away from cemeteries here, talking about, I think it's natural we move off into different territory, these public statuary. I always used to think that it didn't matter. These monuments can stay there. I know they annoy people. They must be offensive, but kind of they're part of the landscape now. Let them stay there until you start to see memorials that counter them, that challenge those narratives. And they're very few, but I remember seeing one last year in Nottingham, which is about workers, and it's really dealing with a tense subject of the relationship between the Nottinghamshire working class communities and what type of embroidery? Lace makers of Nottingham, and of course the labour of mainly black African Americans that supplied the raw material. And the statue is of two women facing each other, and their gazes are fixed on that relationship. And it's really powerful and disturbing until you see something like that and realize, oh, look, this is actually challenging. It's made by local art group. it's trying to foreground this really complex and uncomfortable relationship between Britain, and then after Empire, and the enslaved people that were making the goods. And it's not resolving it. It's not a resolution. It's not trying to tell you how to think. I thought, oh my word, yeah, if we only had 20,000 of those statues, and perhaps one George Washington, one Duke of Wellington, that would be kind of a point where I'd be happy. But but they're not. We're still stuck in these traditional stylizations. So
I find it very interesting that what happened to Edward Colston's statue. So, when George Floyd was murdered, TikTok language, TikTok shop. The people of Bristol who've been protesting for decades about Edward Colston's statue. So that there's been this ongoing argument about the interpretation on this slaver statue, where the local people wanted just a reinterpretation, to explain the full story of this guy. Okay, and the local authority blocked this on every, the planning department, the Tory-run council blocked it and blocked it and blocked it and blocked it. And then you had the George Floyd protests, where the population ran up to the statue, grabbed the statue, and chucked it in the river, leaving a blank plinth and a wet statue and a very worried establishment, who every single one of them felt more empathy with that statue. They saw themselves in the statue rather than themselves in the people. The whole thing was astonishing to watch. Now there is a statue of a protester, I think, a Bristolian of colour, on the place of Edward Colston's statue. And
I didn't realise that. I haven't seen that. Okay, I'll look that up.
I don't know whether it was a temporary work of art or whether it's permanent, because I don't live in Bristol. But it's worth looking at the site to see how the site has been rearticulated. And the statue itself was retrieved from the river and has gone into a museum with the interpretation telling the full story of this guy and the story of the statue going in the river. So there's been this rearticulation of the story, and now everybody knows about everything Colston did, the legacy that he left the city of Bristol. The statue has become this focal point of the story of Bristol as a city. It's a pretty dark and horrible, horrible story. But the point is that the statue became more relevant in that event and in the subsequent storytelling than it was just like standing on a plinth with people driving past it. It's this rearticulation of monuments within landscapes, and there was an attempt to rearticulate the site to commemorate the event of pulling the statue down and the statue going in the river. So there is an ongoing conversation, like a conversation of these monuments within landscapes. I'm kind of like eyeing one in my local town at the minute, going like, there really needs to be a different plaque on that. It's like there needs to be a different plaque about that guy that was in Bengal for so long, and what he was doing there. So yeah, there is room for reinterpretation without removing the monuments. But
I mean, that did remove the monument though too. In that case, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, it's got to be the same way here, but it was and again, here we go. And this is even a dead guy, but who is it that when you realize the names that are of people that are repeated, buildings, streets, schools, public squares, over and over again, and that it's somewhere in like our collective subconscious that these are people that did great things.
Yeah, it's the shared land, isn't it? It's not a shared truth. It's a shared land that everybody's been asked to get behind, even subconsciously, or on board with. And
and often they are invisibilized by, ironically, being made statues. Like I'm thinking of the Cecil Rhodes statue in Oxford. I think, I feel like I spent half of my life as, part of the Rhodes Must Fall movement there, trying to get that statue pulled down. And what is interesting was we were kind of consistently positioned as vandals, and, because there were various attempts to literally tear the thing down, particularly after Coulston, because when Coulston happened, there was this moment of like, oh, so that's how you get them to take you seriously about a statue. You chuck the thing in the river. And I remember all these maps circulating of like, how are we going to throw Rhodes in the river? And the interesting thing about that was, this is a statue that sits literally over the doorway of Oriel College, right? So everybody who goes into Oriel College, Oxford, passes under the feet of this guy. And it's very much like, to me, it became this very powerful metaphor for the whole world that is Oxford University, that, if you want to have entrance through this gilded gateway, you have to pass under the feet of this kind of king of empire kind of figure, right? Who was also a vicious enslaver, a vile racist, and all kinds of other things. And it's interesting because we were positioned as these kind of vandals who wanted to destroy history. I actually think the historical education project that we were responsible for, I think more students knew who Cecil Rhodes was after attending one Rhodes Must Fall protest than they would otherwise do throughout the entirety of their university career. Because, I think it is so easy in somewhere like Oxford, where empire is everywhere, but yet is completely invisible. It looks like money, it looks like privilege, it looks like libraries, it looks like whiteness, it looks like names on doorways that we sort of don't ask who the donor was. All of that stuff is actually empire, but it doesn't wear its name as empire. And I think that what the Rhodes Must Fall movement does, by threatening the physical manifestations of empire, it also threatens the idea that empire should be invisible. It makes a fuss about empire, right? And I think that empire should be made a fuss of. So, at the same time as it hasn't yet fallen, perhaps it will, inshallah. But it hasn't yet fallen. I still think that the Rhodes Must Fall movement, in a sense, was part of the fall of empire, in the sense of bringing empire out of the stones, making empire visible, making empire uncomfortable in the way that it should be. So in that sense, I think these movements for the destruction of statues can be extraordinary educational opportunities, even if you think that the statue shouldn't be pulled down.
And even if they fail to achieve the goal, because you've made the noise, I'd like to ask you, do you have a view on or any of you really, but I was thinking Marchella particularly, but any of you have a view on whether the medium is cursed, that statuary itself is the problem, or is it just by, as I was trying to say earlier, I maybe I'm wrong, just more statues but of different things could at least help. Like I used to think more statues won't help, we need to just end it, but now I've seen some really evocative ones. I thought, well, actually, there's ways of doing it, isn't there? So I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a strong view either way, but I'd love to hear your views.
I guess I think two things about statues at the same time. And I think, Howard, this goes back to what you were saying a while back. You described yourself as, because you kind of work on memorialization, having become kind of more radical and also more conservative at the same time. And you sort of described that as being...
caring more, maybe, I don't know.
yeah about like preservation or not preservation kind of thing, right? That was kind of what we were working with. And as you said that, I was thinking, I think that's because there are two very toxic discourses around memorialization that work at the same time. And one of those is that is the kind of genocidal desire, like we're seeing. Sorry, you're probably not allowed to say that on TikTok. I'm about to be banned or something, but never mind. I do it all the time. I'm about to do it again. The kind of, genocidal destruction of heritage and also of statuary and also of cemeteries. We didn't really talk about that when we were talking about cemeteries, but, Palestinian cemeteries are destroyed in enormous numbers. But also the destruction of like heritage sites in Lebanon, in Syria, in Palestine, which is a very deliberate kind of historicidal thing to do. So there's on the one hand the idea that to destroy a people, you destroy their memory. On the other hand, there's the fact that, you know, Europe, the West, Eurocentrism, white supremacy, whatever you want to call that horrible little nugget in the world, has always valued material culture over actual living human beings. You know, I talk about this all the time in my work, you know, the way that the things that we think of as classical sites are not found with no people in them, beautiful white marble in the desert. They are made that way, usually by enormous disruption of people's lives. It usually involves death. It usually involves displacement, forced displacement. And very often, you know, in the recent history of that classicizing process, those people have been racialized. Many of them have been Muslims. A large proportion of them have been Muslims. So, you know, there's this kind of constant tension between, on the one hand, we're seeing the destruction of people by destroying their heritage and their memories. On the other hand, you know, we've got a kind of Western world that has always cared more about ancient heritage than it has cared about living people. And you see that when, you know, when immediately after the temple at Palmyra was destroyed, you had the French president at the time, François Hollande, you had him saying, I'm going to build this museum and I'm going to save these antiquities from Iraq and Syria from being destroyed, at the same time as he was sending the bulldozers to the refugee camps where people from Iraq and Syria were living, right? So things have always mattered more than people. And those two discourses, to try to take the right side of those two discourses, is actually quite difficult to do at the same time.
You've hit the nail on the head, yeah.
Because on the one hand, you have to make the case that, like, material heritage matters. On the other hand, you have to say material heritage does not matter more than living human beings. And so that, like, delicate balance, and how I think that relates to statues, is like, on the one hand, statues are one way of doing memorialization. We know that memorialization matters because we're seeing those memorialization sites being deliberately destroyed through historicidal, genocidal practices. On the other hand, are statues necessarily good? No. So on the other hand, we don't want to value the statues more than other ways of making history, because statues themselves are, belong to particular kinds of ways of making history that value particular kinds of histories, right? So it's that delicate tension, I think, that we're talking about.
For me, that touches on the... go on, Rachel.
Oh, sorry. I'm like,
right.
me.
Go.
The part of it is, it's like with Black and Brown, saving statues, saving antiquities, it's not memorialization, it's art collecting, right? So you're not there's not an actual practice of preserving cultural heritage and people. It might happen accidentally, but the goal is, there's this beautiful thing. It's not saving. I can't, and you all might know this better, but I mean, I remember at some point looking into, it's like how things are sorted into history museums versus art galleries. And, like how it's like, if you have African, and I don't know the words for them, but like that basically like the villages of the dead are in art galleries, right? In the United, and because they're like, oh, this is beautiful art. But if it was, then Egyptian mummies go in science or history museums. There's like this scale of, how things got sorted that falls in line with white supremacy and colonialism and conquering and so on and so forth. And it's both, right? Because you can't, if you do take and disremember and disname and scrub actual cultural heritage and meaning from both the living and the dead, when you steal those heritage artifacts and bulldoze the refugee camp at the same time. I mean, that's what they do, right? Like, in the US, it's like, and this is not ancient history. This still goes on now. You destroy communities, neighborhoods where people live, and at the same time, you build a highway over the cemetery.
Yeah. And what was actually really funny about this story, about the French president, is that he spends like something like 60 million euros of European Union money building this museum where he's going to bring, it's the kind of white savior fantasy, right? He's going to bring these artifacts from Iraq and Syria to preserve them from being destroyed by these terrible Muslims who he assumes are going to destroy them. The really funny thing is that that museum is still empty, and it's still empty because in the end, the governments of Iraq and Syria were like, no, dude, we remember what happened last time you French people said you were going to look after our stuff, right? What happened was you stole it. It's in your European museums. We never saw it again, right? So, you know, there's this kind of attempt to portray what is essentially like a looting colonial mission, which is absolutely about dismembering, as you said, heritages, and also disremembering them and recontextualizing them in the European Museum so that they don't represent a living history anymore. There was an attempt, I think, on behalf of François Hollande, the French president, there was an attempt to like transform this colonial mission into like a white saviorism narrative, and it just completely failed. And now there's like a little empty museum standing there that he built with all of this money as like proof of that. But yeah, it's like that. Those constant kind of narratives, I guess, are the ones that we're trying to. I think that's partly. So to answer your question about statues, I think we would need to be outside of colonialism. This is like what I'm trying to say all along is that I have no problem with statues in themselves. I just don't think it's possible to conceive of statues outside of a colonial world order right now. So what I want is the end of the colonial world order, and then we can think about your statues.
The very, very.
Can we have that first? Like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not waiting for the end of the colonial world order, right? Because it's taking a long time to fall. But all I'm saying is I think it's impossible to think like in a neutral way about statues. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm trying to get at. It's like, let's put up another statue to a great British Muslim that fits into a conventional authorized heritage discourse of being one of the good guys. And then everyone can clap and go, hurrah, look, we've added another statue. It's that Erica Doss sort of memorial, her work on the American obsession with memorialization. Just fill another gap add another a statue on the pile, and you've rectified a neglect of a community or a group or a narrative. And for me, that's not a solution. But equally, I'm not denying. I see the power of it to combat or to counteract. I see we've never had a memorial to women who worked in this industry, in this place. We need that. Sure, I'm not denying that. But equally, adding another memorial on the pile and another potential target for the next pogrom by nutters doesn't address the underlying discourse on monuments. So yeah, I'm not. You captured the tension and the problems I'm struggling with, and I don't have a solution with, because I didn't want to join the bandwagon at BLM of people saying, well, it's not history. Monuments aren't history. Monuments aren't important. They're not telling us anything. This monument was only raised much later, because for me, those weren't arguments that addressed the core problem. Because for many people, they are history. Whether they should be or could be, they are still the authorized version of what is publicly accepted as memorialization. And that's not history, I know, but in terms of popular reference to, that is and that is the very thing we should be saying, yeah, it is history and it deserves to be ripped down and treated like a human body and stepped on its neck and thrown into a river as a very carefully choreographed symbolic act. And it was important, so it's like saying, oh, it's not history. For me, that wasn't the right narrative to push back against the outrage. But it's difficult. I wasn't really, my voice isn't listened to, and I was just sitting on the edge trying to get my head around it. But I totally so if someone had pulled down Cecil Rhodes, I wouldn't have given a shit, but I would have said, yeah, it is history. It's really important, not even for Oxford, but I would have also said it's important for that story. I wouldn't have said, oh no, he's not really important. I would have said, yeah, he kind of is, and this is what we should do. So, but we're all positioned differently. And I suppose it depends on what you're trying to say in which particular place. And I just wish there was more of an open conversation about this. And I joined a couple of chats online just after the BLM thing with, and I don't know how I got into those conversations because I'm not really an expert in any of this, and I just tried to sort of give a perspective, but it's really difficult. And you see people from different, local councillors from West London trying to sort of talk about their monuments and how they recognise their local black community, and they've got a very different perspective from me. And it's not for me to sort of tell, say, but this is the way it should happen. But yeah, it seems to have died as a conversation, sadly, in the UK. I don't know what you feel, Chella. Is it sort of kind of?
I think we have to remember what was gained in that stuff as well. Because, yeah, in a sense, it has died. And I think that's partly because a lot of the power of that kind of anti-racist political organizing is at the moment being mobilized around Palestine in particular. Not that those two things are mutually exclusive. I don't think they are. I think the question of colonial history, I think the kind of decolonizing of history is happening, in amazing numbers of people at those kinds of Palestine demonstrations. Think about the number of people. If you had said 5 years ago, X place is a settler colonial ethno-state, everyone would have been like, oh, that's academic jargon. What does that mean? Whereas now, like, millions and millions and millions of people can tell you what settler colonialism is now. And I think that's like an amazing thing. So I do think that kind of anti-colonial education is still happening. But I think the one thing I just wanted to add, I think I agree with kind of your assessment of where that Rhodes Must Fall movement is. But the only thing I wanted to add is that, like, it's really important to remember what was won in, even though Cecil Rhodes, I don't know what rude words I'm allowed to use for him on TikTok, but that guy is like still standing there over the doorway of Oriel College. But all of the networks that were formed, right? Rhodes Must Fall, a movement that came out of decolonial organizing in South Africa, and, the student movement connections that were built between students in Cape Town and students at universities across Europe. I mean, all of that, because Oxford are not the only ones with a Cecil Rhodes statue. Unfortunately, there's loads of him everywhere. He's like, I don't know, 2 a penny or something. And so I think, all of what I'm trying to say is the really important stuff is the living network stuff. What we do with the past should always be, I think, in service of the living and justice for those who are, alive, and justice for the dead. But I don't think we should do that at the expense of justice for the living. And I think all those networks that were built are actually super important. And on that note, I have to go because my battery is about to run out. But thanks so much for having me. This has been so much fun. I hope I can come back.
Thank you so much. Really follow Dr. Chella Ward for all insights everywhere. Thank you so much, Chella.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thanks for having me.
I was going to say a straw man response to Chella, but I don't know if it's appropriate now she's dropped. But I was going to say this is not a criticism of those movements, but the real failure of all of these movements is the institution's failure. They're so obsessed with reputational damage, particularly British universities, so obsessed with how this makes them look bad. They are quantifying that and, oh, look, these students are causing noise that makes our look bad. There's no, like with Brexit, where we can qualify the financial impact of Brexit is now quantified, and it's huge. We are all poorer in the UK because of Brexit. Whether we like the EU, whether we think that European identity is something to cultivate, we are all suffering, and the poor especially suffering because of Brexit. What universities in the UK who are facing crisis now don't know and haven't, I don't think, looked for is the reputational damage of still having that fucker statue up, or the many other ways in which they invest in really disreputable investment systems linked to certain countries with settler colonial ideologies. There's no clear assessment of how bad they look by not doing the bare minimum. So this is a bit of a rant, sorry, but it really annoys me that, like, these privileged institutions don't think we are trying hard not to look like the arseholes that we are. Even
that Black Mirror episode.
Yeah, even BP and all these other big corporations know they're the bad guys, but they need to try and look like the good guys. Universities their arrogance is beyond all that. They genuinely think they're the good guys, and anybody who criticizes them is just trying to make them look bad, not, oh no, we actually have to contend with this. And that's what really angers me about a lot of this, is that they will not entertain the possibility that they, as an institution, need to change, other than just put up a few pride flags, organize a few seminars and a few wellness sessions or whatever bullshit, and then, oh, we've done our job. Look, we're inclusive. we've taken a Bain perspective, as I've heard said even recently. And it just makes my skin crawl that you don't have any institutional collective recognition. We'll have a few black speakers. Thank you. That's it. We've done it now. It's that level. It's that level. I'm not joking, Rachel. It's that level, and it's painful. And I'm not saying I'm any better or I'm free of it. I'm blaming the way it all works in the UK, and it's deeply uncomfortable. Sorry, rant.
I think it works as it is designed to work, which is to sever people from their own story. If you have a situation where people are not connected in healthy ways to the truth, then you have a system where you can easily control what's going on. And I think universities have to own the fact that sometimes they act as propagandists for the status quo. That the way in which students are put through privileges some people and not others. Working class scholars in particular, we have some trouble in academia. We face a lot of discrimination, even if we are, of the Mellonly challenge. But black scholars, working class scholars that have funny accents like mine, when we go to different parts of the UK, we have some trouble because people.
You don't have an accent, Lucy.
No. It's like
yeah.
There is this, and there is this terrible cluelessness. It is a kind of cluelessness, and it's a kind of designed cluelessness. So it's like if I talk to like some of the more well-heeled folks at St Andrews is probably the worst for it. I'll be honest, okay. Like Oxford and Cambridge take a bit of a mix, but St Andrews, where they sent William, okay,
yeah, of course,
is oh my goodness. I escaped after 1 year going like, oh, that's where you get your degree, whiter than white. It's like washing powder, and it's like, it was essentially a finishing school. The academics were all right, okay, but the student body was some of the most clueless and completely oblivious to the actual real world.
I taught at Exeter, remember, Bart, Lucy. And I obviously used to go to Oxford a lot when I was at Reading as a postgraduate. And I've been at Cambridge a few times, and there's nests of hierarchy within hierarchy, and it is a utterly bizarre world of denial and cluelessness, and contrived, given by very intelligent people.
Curious. I know it's a little bit off topic, but I have been slowly, and I haven't done a deep dive, but in the last month and a half, like there's been severe, like major changes, obviously, in the higher education industry in this country, in the United States. I think maybe I just saw Johns Hopkins just laid off 100 professors this week.
There's a lot of, I don't know, I haven't kept up with the US.
The new school, like they're breaking tenure, and like that's out the window. Yeah.
It's a career-ending position, and in the UK it's getting worse. Major prestigious institutions are laying off people. My former institution I mentioned earlier, Exeter, is laying off a large number, about 20% of its humanities staff.
Right.
And it's not the first time. This has been going on a long time. This is not a single moment. But AI, the denigration of the humanities and social sciences, it's yeah.
Before it was like they, you couldn't just get rid of tenured faculty, right? That's a shift. I mean, they've been decreasing the numbers. Obviously, you have some universities that are just have been doing for decades, where they just have part-time PhDs teaching almost all their classes, right? But
I've got a plan B now, Rachel, don't you?
Yeah.
When it happens to me, I'm going to become a archeo Uber driver, and I'm going to be what you'll do is I haven't worked. I've only taken an Uber with other people. I don't have the app. I find it very unethical, really. But if I become one, I'm going to become people won't know it, but there'll be an extra 2 minutes on every journey where I'll be taking them via an archaeological or historical site and go, see that building over there? That's where they hanged whatever. Or do you see that Bronze Age barrow down there? And so hang on, I'm supposed to be at the station to get my train. I said, don't worry about it. We'll go extra fast, but you've got to see this Roman villa, and that'll be my spin. Archeo Uber. What do you think?
Yeah.
Do you think it would...
Yeah.
I'm just desperate. It is depressing, and my point is, we're moving into a gig economy that even affects the most privileged of positions, and it's depressing. And the UK actually is in free fall, and yet everyone wants to defend a pissing statue rather than actually deal with the fundamentals of what's going on. With us.
It occurred to me that I did actually give a lift to a hitchhiker from Australia the other day, and I drove him past 3 archaeological sites.
It's hilarious. So it's working already.
I don't want to dox myself or others, but I have one of my internet collaborators visiting from Wednesday to Sunday of this week, so I'm going into full North Wales tour guide role. I'm very excited about it. They haven't been in this part of the UK before ever. So I've given them a detailed, because I know they're very organised. They're very neurodiverse. They want detail. So I've given them like 5 days of an extremely packed itinerary. Whether we'll meet it all, but they're very excited. So I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be good fun. So there'll be more TikToks coming.
I'm curious. Do you do Black history sites in Wales?
I don't actually, and actually that's something that I need to rectify. There are, but most of them are to do with the historic Black communities in Cardiff, particularly Cardiff, and I haven't pursued that. But there are memorials, there are sites, but no, I haven't done that. I haven't.
I think there's. I think there's actually a tavern. Right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
A tavern, the pub, as in
like a 16th or early 17th century tavern that still exists that was owned by a Black man.
Right, that does make sense actually. Yeah, that does make sense. And we do have, so I haven't done that myself. In North Wales, less so. There are some really interesting eclectic memorials on the Lancashire coast to early presence of Black people, but most of them are, shall we say, problematic in their representation. You've got to deal with the pub is called the Black Boy because of a story of an enslaved person and people have gone, we should remove that name of that lane. And you one level you think, you should, but also you really need to think about not erasing the very rare early presence of people of colour in these islands while you're doing so, because you don't want to look bad. So it's about, in that case, it's a much more trying to work out. But there's everywhere in our islands is saturated with our colonial and imperial past. And people who deny it are just idiots. But it's about. In North Wales, where I take people most is Penrhyn Castle, which is a early 19th century neo-Norman nightmare. It was built by a family whose money came from the Penrhyn quarries, slate quarries. 1/5 of the world's slate was being, 1/4 of the world's slate was being constructed by Welsh quarriers in the 19th century, and a large lot of it came out of Penrhyn. So he had his whole docks, his whole railway, his whole quarry, paid the quarriers a pittance. There were some of the longest strikes in Welsh history at these quarries, and he built this edifice, this medieval fantasy castle. But of course, the slaving links come from all of the money to create the quarry came from his plantations in the West Indies. So it's not that slave money made his castle. Slave money made the money to invest to make the quarry to make his castle. And so the National Trust have kind of done their best to sort of trying to allude to this and say reflect on this obscene wealth, but still most people just go around going, oh look, pretty castle, pretty. And it is pretty, but it's as a medievalist, as a medieval scholar, it's like someone's bad opium induced syphilis addled trip into the mind of an early late Georgian, early Victorian mad
castle?
idea of it's like something that even Disney wouldn't have put in a film. It's so bad. But you know, it is beautiful in the sense that it's opulent, you know. But so I take people there, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like what the White House is becoming.
Oh my God, yeah, no, it's Trump, it's proto-Trump, yeah, it's proto-medieval Trump, yeah. You could imagine it's not enough gold though. They need to sort of like paint everything gold, and you know,
yes,
then you'll be at it. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, it really gonna. I mean, whoever inherits this White House, be they Republican, Democrat, or whatever, they're gonna have a job to do. It's gonna take a long time. Maybe it'd be better if you just knock that whole thing down and start
Yes,
again.
I mean, at this point, you have to kind of just destroy the thing. It's like
it's like the Sigourney Weaver option, isn't it? You know, just take off and nuke it from orbit. You know, it's the only way to be sure. There may be still some sort of Trump thing crawling out there. Just sort of burn it with fire. You know, sort of. No, sorry, that's very aggressive.
I mean, it wasn't very attractive to begin with.
I know. And the British burnt it already, you know, so you might as well just finish the job.
Yeah. I mean, well, they did once, right?
Yeah.
I think that was the Canadian.
Didn't you guys do that?
Oh, well, yeah, I thought it was a British/Canadian.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, no, they never let you get a group of drunk Canadians in a room together. It's the first thing out their mouth, like we burned the White House, particularly for some reason Nova Scotians. You know, like they will go into some detail about how Canadians burned the White House.
Well, that's because Nova Scotians. That's how they ended up in Nova Scotia.
I mean, you know, there's. I have stories of Nova Scotians. I used to live in. I did my master's degree in Korea, and I would kind of sneak off and like spend some time with the Nova Scotian English teachers. And we would all get together and play like traditional Irish, Scottish, and Nova Scotian music together in the same room and have this sort of like pan-Celtic mashup. And yeah, so yeah, they could probably outdrink the Scots. I think probably maybe they are us. I don't know. So they yeah. It's but one of the favorite things is that they will regale you every so often about it.
Well, I have to confess at this point, my brain is slowly dying. After I think we're coming up to the 2-hour 45-minute mark, and
we are.
So I may have to say goodnight and drop down. The heat wave is over in the UK, but I'm still sleep deprived from the knock-on effect of all just like not being able to relax. It's too hot, but. And at this point, the unscripted revolution arrives and says, "Hello, Prof," and I feel guilty about dropping down now. But hello, unscripted revolution. Hope you're okay. But I really am at the last stages. But I just want to say thank you so much for all your input. And I didn't even tell Lucy that I was coming online this evening, but I have enjoyed reading your, I don't know what you'd call it, your text. It was wonderful.
I think it's called I don't know. Nobody expects the Scottish disquisition. There you go. Disquisition, reflective essay, something like that. It got published in the Pagan Federations magazine. So, but yeah, so.
Congratulations.
I didn't realise it was published. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
What's happened about the footy unscripted revolution? Is that South Africa? I'm trying to work out which team you might be supporting. I don't care about England. England won twice and drew once. I kind of don't care. If I watch them, they fail. So I'm not the curse of the English. Because if I watch the game, I will lose. And I watched the game that England drew in a pub full of England fans in Cumbria. And all I did was take the piss out of them the whole night, just going, and I copied all the noise. No one challenged me. I was just sitting there going, "Oh, come on, England." And no one noticed that I was taking the mick out of them. I could have got into real serious trouble. And the people with me were going, "How? Stop it. Stop it." I said, "I can't help myself." Anyway, it's coming home. It's out. Oh, South Africa are out of the World Cup. I'm very sorry, unscripted revolution, but don't worry about it. You won't be missing much, I'm sure. But anyway, sorry. I better go. But thank you again, Rachel. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, Lucy. And we'll do this again. And we'll be in touch. And keep scheming.
Thank you. Remember, everybody follow everybody else and do the things. And yeah, thank you.
Take care, everyone.
For relaxing times. Make it Archaeodeath time.